What's up, guys? Mustang Doctor. And there's a concept on a lot of the forums and Facebook groups, do I need a tune on long tube headers? And I'm going to talk to you tonight about why you do need that tune and why you might want that tune. Come with me and check it out. Okay, guys, now that we're into the tune file, I want to dive in as quickly as I can to more of a deep dive review on why you do need a tune and why you'd want a tune on long tube headers. We're going to start with the power side of things, which is the fun part. And one of the main pieces that I'll dive into is the cam angles. And so for the purposes of this video, we're talking about the Mustang Coyote platform. Could be a Gen 1, Gen 2, or Gen 3 Coyote. Hopefully Gen 4 here soon. But in looking at the Coyote platform, based on variable valve timing and cam phasers, the setups or the platform allows us to really go in there and make adjustments to the tune file to really tune for cams. So we can essentially tune for performance cams using optimal performance cam angles, distance tables, or I should say stability distance tables, and a whole host of other parameters to really dial in the cams on your Mustang to bring out the performance. But when it comes to long tube headers, there's one concept with the cams that's really important to talk about, because I don't know there's a lot of guys talking about it, and I'm not sure there's a lot of guys that know of it, and I see way too many comments on I just got long tube headers installed, do I need a tune? And a lot of guys saying, no, just drive it home, you're good. That's true, you can, and we're going to talk about adaptive learning here in a second as to why that works, how that works and why it works, and then also why you shouldn't do it. But for right now, I wanted to dive into the power side and just talk a little bit about a concept called scavenging and what we usually do when it comes to the tune file for performance on long tube headers. So diving in, you've got the intake and the exhaust cam angles for wide open throttle, which is really the power side of this. And you guys can see if this isn't too small, we've got the RPMs over here, and then we've got the cam angles over here. And so you can see different cam angles at different RPM intervals, because that's just how these particular cars, and we're looking at Gen 3 right now, have performed well in the dyno with long tube header setup. So one of the main concepts of long tube headers, and I talked about scavenging earlier, is to advance the exhaust, or I'm sorry, retard the exhaust cam angles a little bit. And then advance the intake cam angles just a hair. So the purpose of that is by retarding the exhaust cam angles, you're leaving that cam angle open a little bit longer through the piston stroke, and in doing so, you're taking advantage of the exhaust platform that you have on the car, and you're leaving that exhaust valve open a little bit longer. And you're also opening the intake valve just a little bit sooner by advancing it. And what that's doing is creating an overlap where your intake side is open while your exhaust side is open a little longer than normal. And that's creating a scavenging effect, which is really pulling that air through. And so by taking advantage of the long tube headers and the exhaust setup on your car, and by retarding the cam angles on exhaust, you're leaving them open a little bit longer, and what that's doing is scavenging or drawing more fresh air in more quickly from the intake side. And so by advancing it just a little bit, you're giving it some of that or that major scavenging effect that's really, as I said, drawing that air in and just creating more power, cramming more air into the cylinder, and really advancing the power there. So a huge play on long tube headers that a lot of guys aren't talking about, that can be done on the Coyote platform really in any generation, and that's advancing and retarding the correct cam angles for intake and exhaust. So jumping from the power side to the adaptive side, and something we mentioned in the onset of this video, a lot of guys online saying, don't worry about it, drive it home, adaptives will take care of it. And that's true. There's a thing called adaptive learning and long-term fuel trims that will take care of things like the O2 transport delay, which is what we'll talk about here in a second, and fuel trims and all sorts of things around that. But one of the things that we'll do on long tube header setups like this is advance this O2 transport delay table. And basically what this is it's a table that's designed to tell the ECU how much of a transport delay there's going to be from when the engine cycles to when that first upstream O2 sensor gets a reading from the exhaust. And so just to step through the engine components for a minute, how this whole platform works, or how I should say how this whole strategy works, is you've got your air coming in the cold air intake. It's being picked up by a mass airflow sensor, a MAP sensor. It's sending a signal off to the ECU of how much airflow is coming through there, how many air molecules are coming through. That signal from the ECU is then sending another signal to the injectors, telling them how long to give injector pulse width for to ensure there's a proper air to fuel ratio. And then after all of that, it's going through the exhaust and hitting that first upstream O2 sensor that's getting a reading to validate all that information. That reading is then saying, are we rich, are we lean, or are we right on the money? It's then sending that signal back up to the ECU to tell it, are we rich, lean, or on the money? And then the ECU is taking that information and saying, let's say we're a little lean, it's going to inject a little bit more injector pulse width. So that cycle is just continuously happening. And with a stock setup, this setup is totally fine, because this O2 transport delay table, the math is set up to understand where that O2 sensor is in the exhaust chamber, or in the exhaust field, as far as how far back it is from the engine. Once you put long tube headers on the car, that upstream O2 sensor is now set back a little bit further. It's usually about 6 inches or so, but that makes a big difference. And traditionally what we'll do in the tune is go right into this O2 transport delay table and advance the table by 1.5 as a jump off point. Then we'll dial it in through his data logging and revisions, but if needed. But it's important to advance this table and not just allow the adaptives to advance it in the background, because one of the things that with adaptives is there's a scalar to them, or a spec. They can only go so far down and so far up. Once you get past that scale, or that scalar, I guess you could say, you're out of spec and you're out of range is probably the better word for it. Once you're out of range, those adaptives can't do anything anymore. So they usually jump over to a failed over table, and that's where your car will usually catch itself and everything will be fine, but it's not going to perform at all. It's going to get you home and that's about it. And so you don't want that on a Mustang. You want to be able to drive peak performance and really enjoy the car no matter where you're at. And so another concept to the adaptive side of things is, let's say you live in the Midwest and you decide to go to Tail of the Dragon. You're going to hit some mountain climbs, and you've got a no tune required intake, you've got a no tune required throttle body, and you've got a no tune, so to speak, long tube header setup. And so you've just allowed the adaptives to take care of everything in the meantime. They've eventually really learned the long-term fuel trims and made those adjustments. Everything feels good as you're driving it around in the Midwest. And you go and make this trip to Tail of the Dragon or some other mountain climb, and all of a sudden now your barometric pressure has changed dramatically, elevations changed dramatically, other environmental conditions that affect the ECU have changed significantly, and now your car is you were already riding the edge of the adaptives, now you're way off the line. And so your car just isn't going to perform like that. So the best thing you can do is get this tuned, because that way you can get it fully dialed in. You can allow the adaptives to just do their thing in those off transient chances that they need to, and your car will operate just fine even under peak power while they're using some of the adaptives. And then you can also take advantage of the optimal cam angles and really get it dialed in for long tube headers and really enjoy the performance in your car. So if you've installed long tube headers and you don't have a tune already, or if you're thinking about getting long tube headers and you're not sure if you're going to get a tune or not, reach out to us. We'd love to talk a little bit more with you about that. If you guys have any other questions or any other thoughts, feel free to throw them in the comments. I'd love to chat a little bit more about these things, and would love to help you out. Have a good one.